Our Plant Stories has been nominated as a finalist in the Independent Podcast Awards in a new category called Environment and Natural World. I'll let you know how we get on. Thanks to all those who are regular supporters of the podcast with their commitment to buying a monthly coffee. And to Anne, who also sent some caffeine my way this month, all of which goes towards paying for this podcast, the hosting platform and the editing programme. The link is in the show notes. And now, a plant story. Welcome to an offshoot episode of Our Plant Stories. With this podcast, each month there will be a new plant story, but sometimes there may also be an offshoot that I've stumbled across whilst researching the plant story. In Penn's Viburnum, and if you haven't yet heard it, I do hope you'll take a listen, we met a young man called Will Purdom. Born in the Lake District, the son of a gardener, he had been trained at Kew, and then gone to China plant hunting, from where he had sent letters and seeds back to Penn's family. In this Viburnum Offshoot, we are back in the Lake District. Today's guest, Vicky Aspin, is a volunteer at Holehird Gardens, a 10-acre fellside garden managed by the Lakeland Horticultural Society with views over Windermere. She has written a book called A Perfect Friend, The Life of Cumbrian Plant Hunter William Purdom. And I am sitting in the sunshine with Vicky.
We're now sitting on the Purdom seat, and the original was donated by William Purdom's sister Sarah Elsie to the Society in about 1974-75. And I was volunteered, because I was young, to come up here and take bluebells out of the bed that we're looking at. And, well, that was it. It was a bit of a wilderness, and I sat on this seat, turned round, and I thought, what is a Purdom? And that is where the quote in my book comes from. What are Purdoms? And that's where it all started. And so a name, a site, whatever, can take you into gardening in a way that you will never expect.
I love that story. And it simply says, for Three Native Lakeland Gardeners, William Purdom and sons William and Harry. So how did you start?
Digging. No. Well, what do? You try to find out who this person was, why he was important. Very little at the time had been written about him. Well, nothing really, apart from certain articles. And of course, it was before the internet. So if you wanted to know if somebody had any information, you wrote an email letter and said, I say, have you heard of William Purdom? And then 6 weeks later, an email would come back saying, hi, we do, we know. And then you start gradually putting information together about, well, we know he collected this, or we grow this, or have you heard of Mr. So-and-so? And the joy of it is in the hunt, the chase, the magic of what these men did. I think it's absolutely riveting. Yeah.
So, paint a picture for us of Will Purdom. Do you call him Will? Do you call him William?
I wouldn't be so familiar. Normally, I always think of him as Purdom. I would not dream of addressing him by his first name unless I was given permission. So Purdom has always stuck as the way I think of him. He was son of a local gardener, Brathay Hall, and if we look from the seat where we're sitting, we can look across Windermere in a direct line to Brathay Hall, and that's why this seat is here, so that the line is there. And Ian, his father, his mother and father were remarkable people, had nothing, 7 children, and they wanted to give them the best start in life they could. And, well, there we go. That's when it started. He was educated at Kew, became a bit of a firebrand, stood up for the working man, for the students, for what he felt were unfair treatment, and they needed to do something exciting with him without appearing unreasonable. He had been sacked at one point and reinstated, And there's an expedition we're planning. How would you like to go to China, William? Sighs of relief. In China, he won't be able to be a problem anymore. And anyway, as I say, once I start, I can't stop. Let's have a look at some of the plants, shall we? Right, the Alan, sorry, the dead viburnum is there.
It is.
That is even deader than I thought it was. Is there any sign of...
I think these buds are viable.
Yeah.
So tell me about the viburnum.
Right, viburnum is now known as Viburnum farreri, which I think is a total misjustice, simply because I think botanically it's the way things go. But Purdom collected 2 viburnum when he was out on his first expedition to China, 689 and 690 I think they were, and he brought them back and they were propagated. I think the garden at Highdown, wasn't Bowles, it might have been Stern, whoever, managed to grow it, grew beautifully, flowered, but the source of the propagation material was from a monastery garden. Therefore, it was not collected in the wild. And so when he travelled out with Farrer, he said, yes, I will find you Viburnum fragrans growing in the wild, which he did. And it came back and it grew and was propagated. And at some stage, it was decided that as Farrer had brought back the propagation material or sent back the proper, it would be right and proper to call it Farreri as opposed to Purdom, because he was the man that showed him where to get it. But then I'm biased.
So we've got this young man. How old is he when they decide to send him to China? They decide he can go to China.
1908 was when the plans were set. He had been dismissed for agitating and was reinstated as it was deemed to be inappropriate. But they needed to, they couldn't find a suitable place for him. So we're talking 1908. You need to remember that to progress in horticulture, you should be employed in one of the great gardens. Who's going to take on a firebrand? Nobody. And yet they speak of him as an exceptional propagator, a fine young man with such potential. And the thought was, there was a joint expedition between the Arnold Arboretum in Massachusetts and Veitch Nurseries in London to go out and find hardy plants, mainly trees and shrubs for the Arnold Arboretum and decorative plants for Veitches. And they needed somebody who would be cheaper to send than Ernest Wilson, the great Ernest Wilson, more amenable than George Forrest, who was brilliant but wouldn't stand any nonsense. And in a way, I think Purdom was a bit of an innocent. He was overwhelmed by the offer.
What do you even pack? How do you prepare? What do you do when you're suddenly quite young and you're heading off to China as a plant hunter?
Well, you talk to people who've been, you look at what, they've taken, you get in touch with, I think Purdom was in touch with Augustine Henry. I think he tried to get in touch with Wilson. He was in touch with the British legation in Beijing, asking all the time, how do you hire men? How do you hire carts? What do I need? And both Veitch and the Arnold Arboretum would have been experienced in setting up expeditions. So if you look at any of the expeditionary lists, they're fascinating. One hand axe, five balls of string, down to the finest detail. Pressing paper, things to make herbarium samples out of. Food, shotguns, boots, clothing, waterproofs, no such thing as waterproofs as such. How did you keep dry? You know, a good tweed jacket, a knitted jumper, and, you know, and where they were sending him was not a well-known area.
Did he have maps? Was he?
No, there were no maps, very few maps, because he was going into unmapped territory.
How much money did he have?
He had enough to, well, in theory, feed himself, and they used to send bankers' orders out to, you know, banks in Shanghai or at Beijing or wherever. Carrying money was necessary so long as people didn't know you had it, because otherwise the bandits would come down and steal your money.
And did he have any idea of how long he would be gone for?
3 years. That was the planned thing. 3 years, do not come back within that time. In the first 6 months you will go to ABC, you will make lists of plants, you will note where they are, you will see if they're flowering. You will then in the autumn return to exactly the same places and collect the seed, if you can find it. You will then dry the seed, you will pack it, you will send it to us in packages of XYZ. And while you're doing that, you will take photographs, you will make herbarium samples, you will take detailed records of the local people, the topography, etc., etc. Oh, and by the way, it will probably be helpful if you learn to speak Chinese. Easy.
I mean, and you're on your own, by the way, as well.
Oh yeah, he's on his own. He wasn't sent with another European. He was absolutely on his own. He did hire interpreters at one stage, but gradually picked up Chinese so quickly he could speak to his, servants, carriers, whatever. There were only about 6 or 7 of them.
But today we have so many sources of checking, don't we? We'd go on our phones, we'd look on the internet, we'd look at other. Is he relying on his own knowledge to be able to identify those plants? How does that work?
Some of it would work, and some of it, if you look at his collection notes, it will say herbaceous, it might say primula, it might say he was better with his trees, it might say birch, he might be able to identify it down to genus, species, whatever, but when it came to herbaceous plants, that was pretty tricky. And if you think that you come back 6 months later to find the seed pods of this wonderful thing, and of course the yaks or whatever have eaten it, tough. You might, the actual extent of the journeys. I mean, he was climbing up to 15,000 feet, and you would say he was rather tired, and but the one line of communications were the missionary settlements, and they were in a way little havens. And if you are able, if you ever want to look up something, you get something like Stanford's Atlas, which was published if you look, I think there's one about 1912, and it will plot all the missionary stations by province, and you can see them dotted around, and there would be things like the Silk Road will go from vaguely Beijing to Xi'an, and then up through the marches of Tibet and into the Middle East eventually.
So he's there for 3 years.
Yeah.
What happens when he comes back?
Well, first thing you've got to remember is I'll do this very quickly. You've got Puyi, who was the last emperor. Anybody that's seen that fabulous film, The Last Emperor? And he was, I think, dethroned in 1911. So there was this great scramble for power, the warlords, China was in chaos. When he came back, there was all this stuff, and basically the vote was, he did his best, but he could have done better. And the rational point to that is, yes, but if you'd sent him to Yunnan instead of Kansu or Tibet, he might have found things to collect. And there were certain areas that were particularly important for him, Taipei Shan, south of Xi'an, was one. He collected marvellous things there. And then up to Choni, and the sort of western marches of Gansu now. When he came back, Wilson had already brought thousands and thousands of samples back. People were more interested in dealing with those than with what he brought back. So an awful lot of his stuff, is still probably unidentified in archive, in herbarium.
Was it also about connections?
Well, he hadn't got connections, had he?
Exactly.
He was basically a working man. So although he might have been valued by those that knew him, he didn't have influence. And probably the person who valued him most was Dr. Huff at White's Crags. And the relationship between the two of them as, like a mentor, and yet somebody who, could share his love of plants. They just seem to be, well, I won't say father and son, but very, 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 a great bond between the two. And, and I think some of the good things you ever see written about Purdom are written by Dr. Huff, which I think is gorgeous.
So, he's done one trip to China. It's not considered a huge success.
Yeah.
How does he now end up going back again?
Okay, he was desperate to go back. I won't say he'd gone native, but he loved China. He loved the Chinese. And he wrote, I think it was 1913, The Impact of Deforestation in China, which was, because of the building of the railways, because of the use of wood for fuel, etc. And in a way it fell on stony ground. But along comes Reginald Farrar. Hello, Reggie. And Reggie had seen one of his primulas in the Primula Conference in 1913, asked Dr. Huff to arrange an introduction, and then made this absolutely fabulous offer to Purdom, which was, would you like to go to China again with me for no money, maybe a share of the...
So for no money means there's no payment. You won't get any money for going.
No.
You're just going.
You'll get your board and lodging.
Right. Okay. Just clearing that. I'm making sure I'm clear on that.
Yeah. And you will go out before I do. You will travel third class. I will follow on in first class. And when I arrive, I expect everything to be prepared in readiness for my arrival. And it was like that virtually all the way through. Purdom was 1 or 2 steps ahead, plotting where they were going, discussing where they were going, and seeing to Reggie's every need, really, because he was so demanding.
There's a picture in your book, and he's in a sedan chair.
Oh, yes.
Which seems extraordinary.
Well, why not? He could, why should he ride on a horse if it's more comfortable in a sedan chair?
Were they going to a different area this time?
Well, Farrar claimed that it was different. It was going further into Gansu and into the Tibetan marches because he wanted alpines. And the funding was organised by Farrar. Lots of important people he called in to help, including the Rothschilds, people like that. He had contacts. I mean, his family was wealthy anyway.
And how long is this second expedition due to be?
Well, Farrar told Professor Balfour in Edinburgh that he'd do it in a year. And Professor Balfour in Edinburgh said, I think not, and you need a China hand, and the only person that could possibly undertake this journey would be Purdom. And so Purdom bit his hand off, but did also say, made it clear, that he was going out to help, but that if the opportunities in forestry came up, then he would not stay with Farrar. He would possibly,
So he was already thinking that he had a longer term project and time in China when he goes back the second time.
Yeah, but then who was expecting the First World War?
So this happens. When's their trip? When do they go?
They set out, I think it was March 1913 from Beijing. And by the time they'd got somewhere of use, First World War had started. And they found out, by telegraph or whatever through the missionaries that there was a war, over by Christmas. Was it worth coming back? And could they get back even if they wanted to? With the state of unrest,
So they stay there throughout the war?
Farah then did this remarkable thing of travelling back on the Trans-Siberian Railway to Petrograd to see the herbarium samples there. 1917 Petrograd, hello, revolution, oh well, stand back, I want to look at some herbarium samples. He was indestructible, he was extraordinary. And Purdom stayed behind, packed all the seeds and plants, was offered a job with the railway, forestry commission and so forth, stayed and died. Farah died in 1920 in Burma and Purdom died in 1921 in Beijing. Young men born in the same year with such wonderful gifts. End of story.
We met Alan Oatway, garden coordinator at Holehird in Penn's Viburnum, where he taught us how to grow the plant. So, to step aside for a moment from Purdom and Farah, how does Holehird fit into this story?
The Groves family who lived in Holehird were keen gardeners and associated with other keen gardeners in the area to share their love of the type of plants that they enjoyed growing. And William Groves, who at the same time as Charles Huff was building White Crags, shared a relationship with them. They both knew each other well and they shared a love of alpine and mountain plants, and that developed and gave rise to the stories that you've been hearing about.
So the Groves are also investors in William Purdom's second trip?
As I understand it, because Dr. Huff had this very keen relationship with Will Purdom, he was keen to support the expedition, and he got the assistance of William Groves and I believe Mrs. Marshall of Skelethbridge to share in 1/10 of a subscription to that expedition.
And how is this garden maintained?
Holehird Gardens now is maintained entirely by volunteers, so we have 10 acres and an unknown quantity of gardeners that help look after the gardens. Each gives the time that they can afford to give according to the energy that they've got. Many of us are retired, so we start off very energetic and enthusiastic, and gradually we slow down a little.
And it's been preserved all the way through, so it's never had a period where it was uncared for and then it had to be refound again, or is...
It had a very uncared for period between the original donation of the gardens by the Groves family, which was made in 1946, until the Lakeland Horticultural Society was founded in 1969. So on its founding, there was a lot of removal of brambles and so on to be done in order to find the plantings that were still in situ.
Vicky, can I ask you one other question? What do you, when you wrote the book,
Yeah.
I get a sense of you are fond of Purdom. You really...
I like his view of, I suppose he encapsulates my feelings about if you work hard, you're worthy of your hire, you are worthy of respect, you are equal. And he had a very modern outlook on it. He was a liberal, but he believed in, he railed against this, you need to be treated better because of who you were rather than what you were. And Farrar summed him up saying he didn't have this, suppleness of knee to bend when required. You know, he would stand there and say, well, I'm sorry, you're wrong, instead of excuse me. You know, he just, I think, was perhaps in many ways ahead of his time in, you know, saying, well, what about, you know, the social issues? And I think that resonates with me as a person, that I think it doesn't matter who you are, does it?
Not at all.
Does it?
And do you think he was ahead of his time in terms of the kind of deforestation aspect of that?
Oh, yeah.
So
Absolutely.
what had he spotted? What had he realised?
Well, he'd seen that when trees were cut down in quantity, the climate changed, the soils dried out, the loss of bird cover, and then higher mammals, and so basically the whole ecostructure went from losing the trees, and that was what he was convinced about.
And does he write about that?
Oh yes, he wrote a report. I don't know where it went, and one of the reasons he stayed in China was he was commissioned to set up nurseries for trees that would be suitable for building the railways. You know, the taxodium types of things, and the Chinese loved him. And in the Purdom Forest Park, you still see great taxodium standing in the water. And I think the park opened in 1996, 97, something like that. And
it's named after him.
Oh yes, in his honour. He is known better, or in China than he is in his own land. They never forgot him, and that's why I went out to China, because they invited me to go.
So you went to China?
Oh yes.
And you went to the park?
Purdom Forest Park, yeah, on my own.
And your memories of it?
Well, it was a park full of trees. And we walked round, and they'd say, well, yes, we're learning to grow this, and we've got different types. They gave me a book in Chinese, which I couldn't read, of all the different flowers that were in the park. And, the odd thing that I've managed to find that were actually growing in the park. They're not rare, and he didn't introduce them, but, I've got one or two going, got one or two going in the bed. But no, it was wonderful, The authorities in China had contacted Q and said, do you know anybody who knows anything about Purdom? And I think the person who fielded the inquiry had been helping me with doing some digging and delving, and they, and so there it is. Hello, Mrs. Vicky.
All from a bench.
All from a bench.
With a name plaque.
With yeah. And that is it. That who would think that sitting on a bench in the sunshine would take you to China?
My thanks to Vicky Aspin and Alan Oatway, who were so generous with their time and their knowledge, and it was an absolute delight to spend time with them. You can find lots of information and photographs on the website ourplantstories.com. And if you want to help support this second series of the podcast, I would be so very grateful. You can buy me a coffee on that website. And do sign up to the blog so you don't ever miss the offshoot or bonus episodes. Our Plant Stories is an independent podcast presented and produced by me, Sally Flatman. Thank you for listening. If you want to show your support for this podcast via Buy Me a Coffee, then the link is in the show notes or on the website ourplantstories.com. I promise you, your virtual coffee will go towards the podcast, not plants.